Hey freshmen, so today we're going to be doing a new lesson. Today we're going to be learning about timelines. Some of you may have seen timelines before, and that's okay. By the end of class today, you're going to be able to look at a timeline and know exactly how to interpret any information you can get out of it. For example, when an event occurred or how much time passed in between two different events. So let's go ahead and get started. Our key ideas are: what do timelines show us, and what can a timeline look like? As you'll soon see, timelines can look very different. Some will have pictures, some won't have pictures, some will have dates, and some won't even show the dates, and that's okay. All timelines are going to show us the order of events in which things happened in history. So, for example, what happens first, second, third, fourth, and when these happen. Our key questions for today are as follows. What would you use a timeline for? How do you annotate a timeline? How do you determine how much time has passed between two events? And how do you determine where an event falls on a timeline? Let's take a look at our first timeline. This is of the Civil Rights Movement. So a timeline is a diagram that shows events that took place during a certain period of time. Like a calendar, a timeline can help you understand the order of events and the amounts of time between them. A timeline looks like a ruler marked in dates instead of inches. Like inches marked on a ruler, the dates on a timeline are evenly spaced. Horizontal timelines are read left to right, like a book. The earliest date is on the left, and the most recent date is on the right. So for example, here, our earliest date over all the way on the left is going to be 1850. Our latest date is 2000, all the way on the right. Just like we do with pictures, we are going to annotate our timelines. Our steps for annotating are: write older on the left and newer on the right, label the first event and the last event, and circle keywords in the descriptions. Here's an example of my annotations. First, I wrote older all the way on the left, and then I wrote newer all the way on the right, so I don't get confused. Then I labeled my first event, which is over here in 1865, and my last event, which is over here in 1868. Last, I went through and circled some keywords and phrases that I noticed in my descriptions. For example, abolishes slavery, Plessy versus Ferguson, Martin Luther King, etc. Timelines show events that happen in a particular period of time. The period of time a timeline shows is called the span of time. Some timelines show events that happened over 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years. For example, this timeline of the Civil Rights Movement represents events from 1850 to 2000, or 150 years. How did I figure this out? I took the newer number, the one all the way on the right, and then subtracted the older number, the number all the way on the left. So I did 2000 take away 1850 equals 150. So this timeline shows 150 years. We can also use a timeline to figure out how much time passes between two events. To figure out how many years happen between events, we use the same steps. We put the newest year on the top and the oldest year on the bottom, and then subtract. For example, if I want to figure out how many years after Plessy versus Ferguson, Martin Luther King made his famous speech, I need to subtract. First, I look at the newest number of the two events, which is 1963. Then I look at the oldest date, which is 1896, and I subtract. So I have 1963 take away 1896 equals 67. So 67 years passed between Plessy versus Ferguson and the I Have a Dream speech. Now, we're going to try this on our own. Here is a timeline representing the exploration of the United States. How many years passed between Christopher Columbus arriving in America and the settling of the colony in Jamestown? So, using my steps, I'm first going to go ahead and annotate this timeline. I wrote older all the way on the left, newer all the way on the right. I labeled my first event, my last event, and I went ahead and circled key details. Now, Jamestown was settled in 1607, so that's my newest date, so that's going to come first. Christopher Columbus is my oldest date, 1492, so that's my second number. 1607 take away 1492 equals 115. So 115 years passed between Christopher Columbus arriving in America and the settling of Jamestown. Now, like we said, timelines can look different. Some timelines might have pictures, like this timeline of the Olympic history. Others might not have pictures and might just have events, like our exploration timeline. Still others might have no descriptions and simply be labeled with letters or numbers. Take a look at this timeline representing the first president, George Washington's life. This timeline shows us the important events that happened in his life. So we have our span of time, and then each of these letters represents one event. So I'm going to be asked to determine where a particular event should fall. For example, if I know that George Washington was elected president in 1789, I'm going to go to my timeline and look for where 1789 is, just before 1790, and I'll see the letter L here. This tells me that letter L represents George Washington's election. Now, if I know that George Washington was born in 1732, I'm going to go and look for 1732 on my timeline, go all the way down here. It's going to fall between 1730 and 1735, so I know that A must represent George Washington's birth. You're going to have plenty of time to practice with these today. As soon as we're done with this section here, we're going to go ahead and practice these on our whiteboard. So, take the last couple of minutes to draw a picture to remind yourself what you learned in this lesson today. As soon as you're done, we'll get started with guided practice.